I would now like to introduce the San Antonio Chamber President and CEO, Richard Perez.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the San Antonio Chamber of Commerce 2020 Congressional Series web style, featuring our good friend, Congressman Will Hurd. As you've just heard from Stephanie, we say friend because he is a friend and he's done fantastic work for this community and all the communities that he supports all the way from here to from San Antonio all the way down to El Paso. Well, before we begin, I want to give a special shout out to our event sponsors. You know, even in this time of pandemic and all the things that are just going on in our world, you know, the business community continues to support the chamber, support events like this where we get to hear from folks like you that tell us what is happening on the ground in Washington, D.C. and what you're doing to help improve lives. And so I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Those sponsors are AT&T, Credit Human, Lockheed Martin, Port San Antonio, Southwest Airlines, Valero, and Walmart. Again, these businesses have stepped up. They understand, of course, the importance of continuing to support events like this one, where we're hearing from folks like you, Will, that have the pulse on what's happening in D.C., can really give us some good insight. I'd also like, excuse me, to take a moment to thank my staff. You know, like many folks on this call, on this webinar, they're working from home. It's a difficult environment. They have kids, they have, you know, parents, they have, you know, things are just different and it's harder to work from home. At least I feel it is. And so I want to thank them for their diligence, for their dedication, and for their focus. That's really making our jobs as leaders of this community so much easier. So the highly anticipated Congressional Series provides wonderful opportunities for our business and community leaders to hear directly from our congressional members about the work they're doing to address the most pressing issues facing our nation and in particular this community. In the midst of this pandemic, this is even that much more important. During today's event, Congressman Hurd will tell us about his expectations for the next federal recovery package and his thoughts on reopening the U.S. economy. He will also reflect, maybe just a little bit, on his time representing Texas's 23rd Congressional District. And I'm hopeful, Will, and I don't want to put you on the spot here, but maybe you could even give us a sneak peek into what's in the next chapter of your career path. I'll remind everybody, of course, this is an opportunity to ask questions. Congressman Hurd has always been not shy about answering questions, and so please send your questions in and we'll get them to answer them. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Since being elected in 2014, Will Hurd has continued to blaze his own trail and has delivered bipartisan results for the 800,000 Texans he represents in a district that sprawls from San Antonio all the way to El Paso. He has earned a reputation as a dedicated legislator, willing to work across the aisle to solve problems that empower people in the communities that he represents. Will serves on the House Appropriations Committee and on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, including serving as the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Intelligence, Modernization, and Readiness. Will, we are thrilled that you're here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, man, and to your entire team, and your friendship and support and guidance over the years has been critical. I always know there's a place to go to get unvarnished, you know, opinion, and that's valuable. And so maybe what I want to do, and hopefully I don't go on too long, so I do want to get to as many questions as possible. Just set a scene, and we all have to start. The country is hurting right now, right? Everyone is saddened, everyone is scared. A lot of this has been manifested in the response on what we saw, you know, a police officer killing George Floyd. And I was down in Houston earlier this week, and marching in solidarity with the George Floyd family. And I said, what I saw at that rally was real simple. We can be absolutely upset, apoplectic about seeing a Black man being murdered in police custody. We can be appreciative of law enforcement enabling our First Amendment right. And we can also be outraged by looters, rioters, and people trying to kill cops or killing cops or killing or beating up innocent bystanders. All those things we can experience those feelings all at the same time. And at every level of government, there's things that we can be doing to address these issues. and three areas where I think Congress needs to do something. Is first and foremost, when there's about $2 billion in federal funds that go to local police departments. We can make sure those funds only go to police departments that are following best practices when it comes to things like community policing and how they deal with civil rights. I also think that we need to be empowering police chiefs in order to be able to fire bad cops. This is a debate here in San Antonio. Oftentimes the police chiefs, the other police officers know who the bad cops are, and they get fired. And because of the adjudication process, they get put back onto the force or are able to go to other precincts in other cities. That shouldn't be happening. Those are two things that we can do, and there's also a liability protection that's afforded to federal officials that are doing their duties that often prevent them from being sued for criminal acts. If somebody, even if they're wearing a uniform, commits a crime while wearing their uniform, they shouldn't be protected from the law. And those are three areas that I think Congress can be exploring on how to ensure that we actually see justice from the killing and the murder of George Floyd. We're still the passions and being cooped up in our homes over the last few weeks and months. And because of COVID-19 is playing into this. One of the things that I think we are lucky here in Texas that our leaders at all levels are responding appropriately. What's happening here in San Antonio is very different than what's happening in El Paso, and we have the freedom to do that. I literally invited some colleagues on the Appropriations Committee who was concerned about the ability to be able to do testing in another state. I said, hey, come to San Antonio. Anybody can get tested. All you got to do is sign up. And so we're fortunate to do this. And I remind folks that San Antonio has been dealing with this since the third week of January, as you all know, when we had the 91 U.S. citizens repatriated from Wuhan, China. And these are conversations and issues that have been going on for a long time. The next step is as we look, I think we're in phase 3 or about to enter phase 3 as Governor Abbott defines it. There will be an additional aid package. What was called the HEROES Act that was passed in a strictly partisan. I think one Republican voted for it. There will be another package. Senate is debating what that looks like. There will be some variation of support to state and local states and local communities. And the debate is going to be, how can those federal funds what can they be used for? We understand the budget impacts that COVID-19 is having on cities and states. The state of Texas is going to probably have a $40 billion budget deficit. Back, I think it was 2011, I think it was 11 or $13 billion. So everybody is going to get impacted. And one area that I'm trying to work on that we all agree on is digital modernization. I think COVID-19 has shown us that digital infrastructure is indeed important infrastructure. And, we all can't do 10 Zoom calls a day if you don't have the high-speed internet to do that. Your kids can't go on to do studies online if they don't have access to the internet. And how do we improve that? We saw also when it came to unemployment, Congress passed a pretty robust package to ensure people that were unemployed had resources to get through the months. But the Texas Workforce Commission didn't have the capacity to deal with the load that they saw. And so how do we ensure that that we give additional dollars to states and cities to modernize digital infrastructure that helps them better provide digital-facing services to constituents or leverage existing federal dollars? And I've been talking about a state and local modernization fund that helps us modernize our digital infrastructure, because we're talking about recovery. I don't like that word because recovery to me means going back to a place that we've already been. I want to talk about advancement. I want to make sure that we're better out of this. I think we're all going to come out of this appreciating connections to individuals even more. We realize how much we miss those conversations at the water cooler with our colleagues and being able to meet up with friends, for a happy hour afterwards. And so I think we can be better once we get through this. Now, timing on all this matters. In the next, right now, Speaker Pelosi doesn't have us coming back into Congress until the 28th or 29th of this month. There's a possibility that it may come sooner. I think there's plenty of business that needs to be done, and we need to go back for the appropriation cycle is going to be ongoing for FY, the next fiscal year, and many of these bills are going to have COVID-related provisions. The goal is to get those off the House floor by the end of July. And so we will be waiting on what the Senate is going to do on their, if we call it a phase 4 package. 2 points, Richard, I want to touch on before we go to Q&A, if that's okay. One is we've all seen, and many of us probably participated in the San Antonio Food Bank and getting food to folks. We know how they went from 60,000 deliveries or provisions a week to 120,000. We all saw that image of 10,000 cars in line. And one thing that Eric and had educated me on, we had been working to try to do, is this concept we call pandemic EBT. The number of kids that are in schools that are on free and reduced lunch that are not getting access to food is probably a lot higher than what we know. The numbers are somewhere between only 15 to 20% of the kids that are on free and reduced lunch are actually getting some kind of meal from their school districts. Every school district, especially in Bexar County, have pursued some Herculean efforts to make sure we're getting food to these kids. We deal with this problem in the summer, and one thing that pandemic EBT does is it says, let's say you're already on using your SNAP benefits and you have a Lone Star card, if your child is able to is on free and reduced lunch, that Lone Star card is going to get credited with more money so you can go buy food at the grocery stores, which is what our system is designed for. And if you're not on SNAP benefits, you'll get one so that you can go to the stores and buy food for your kids. We worked really hard to get this for Texas. Not all states have gotten this, and we're trying to extend these benefits for a number of additional months. So that's important. And then the PPP program, I'm sure there's going to be some questions here. Many of y'all have reached out to me and Henry Cuellar and our teams to address the individual concerns. Senate yesterday or the day before yesterday passed the House bill that in essence extended the amount of time that you're able to use that PPP loan. The feedback that we were getting from many of y'all is that the time horizon to pay this back, because many employees had to go on unemployment, you weren't going to be able to hit the requirements on how that money can be spent in order to get the loan forgiveness. And so we went from, having to pay this back within 8 weeks, and so now 24 weeks, which is going to be, it's going to allow us to supercharge our advancement now that we are opening back up. So that was passed, and those further rules should be coming down from Treasury. If you have a PPP loan, you should be checking the Treasury FAQs, frequently asked questions website daily, because there's always new guidance. And if there's specific cases, the way we've always solve a problem for one person, and then you can solve it for thousands. And if you have specific issues, don't hesitate to reach out to me. But a lot of issues with China, a lot of issues with WHO. I'd love to get into those. But Richard, I've already taken up too much time, and I'm sure there's some questions in the queue.
Well, thank you, Will. As always, you start off strong and you finish strong. Very direct on the fact that we have issues and that we're trying to address them. And you've been a fantastic champion for us. I love what you said at the beginning about firing bad cops, and federal immunity. I think there is a lot there. Having served on the San Antonio City Council and gone through a couple of iterations of collective bargaining contracts, a lot of that is actually in those details of the collective bargaining and how the process goes and how it's weighted towards the officer. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there, and I think that's really where there's a focus that we should be able to pinpoint.
Sure, Richard, and you hit it on the head. You can really address this at the local issue, but what we can do is say, hey, guess what? You ain't getting federal dollars if that happens. Period. Your choice, your decision, right? And we all know, every officer on the force knows who the bad cops are. And we know that it's a handful, right? We know it's a minuscule amount, but this is a duty, a sacred duty that federal law enforcement, local law enforcement, people in the intelligence community, elected leaders, we should be held to different standards.
I agree. I think you're saying things that I think a lot of people will embrace, particularly if you're a local elected official, having that construct and needing some flexibility to deal with it will really, I think, even take some of the pressure off. Folks are really upset right now, and they're upset at policemen and women. But as you've said, there's just a few. There's not a lot, right? And it's the ability to get rid of those folks and really put more of the folks that you and I know and trust to continue to protect us. So a couple of questions that we had, a lot of it around the HEROES Act. You did touch upon it a minute ago. Tell us a little bit about, because, the HEROES Act was pretty broad, and there are some provisions in there that I think many of us would say we need to kind of look at that and add. Maybe pick that out a little bit and tease it out a little bit. Tell us your thoughts.
Sure. Look, there were provisions that were just absolute non-starters that addressed everything from union organizing to additional unemployment, to making it easier to not go to work. Like it was ultimately incentivizing people to not go to work, right? And I've heard from many employers that they're having a hard time bringing people back, and they're having to give rehiring bonuses because they're like, hey, we want to wait for unemployment to run out. And so that was the biggest issue. It was a philosophy that again was hard to get behind. Now, some of the additional support to hospitals, there's already been agreement on that, right? This is how we passed 3 major pieces of legislation, and the fact that Congress came together in a bipartisan, bicameral way and passed well over, I think it's ultimately now $4 trillion worth of funding. It's a pretty big deal, and why were we able to do that? Because the negotiations were bipartisan, bicameral. The HEROES Act wasn't that way. So there will, even Mitch McConnell has said, there's going to be some structure. There's going to be something where we, additional help for PPP loans, additional help for first line responders, the flexibility on how you use some of these PPP loans at cities. And the real question is, and it's going to come down to, Chicago versus San Antonio. How can you use some of the additional federal dollars that are going to ultimately be able to supplement budgets in the future that was impacted by COVID-19? And what does impact by COVID-19 mean? And one of the things that can be helpful, and this is what I've been encouraging mayors and county judges, is say, give me a list of what are those top 5 things that how you would use federal dollars, how you would spend them. We know revenue is going to be impacted. We know revenue is impacted by COVID-19, but it's the expense side of the ledger that we need to know how those federal dollars are going to be used, and let's agree on, funds can be used for X, Y, and Z. And that's really where the conversation is and where the biggest sticking point is going to be.
Excellent. You talked a little bit about digital modernization, and I think in many respects, years ago when we didn't have telephones and we went on this building telephones, or you could even liken it to the railroads way back even further. I think the digital modernization is very much like one of those things that if we do it right, we can really provide opportunities, and as you've said, to do exactly what we're doing here right now. Tell us a little bit more about that plan and your thoughts on it, because we certainly could use it here in San Antonio, and I'm certain all throughout your district. So
first step is we have to map where there is no access, right? Literally, and Stacy and Bianca on my team who's on this can confirm. And in like a third of my district, I don't even have cell phone service, right?
Wow.
And so we have to be able to map where those problems are. And it's not just in rural areas, but the rural-urban divide is real, and it's growing even further. But you also have to map that where you have that in urban areas. And so this is one of the ideas. Okay, let's say that there is a school district that has exceptionally low rates of connectivity to high-speed internet access. All right, there can be some federal dollars that come through the city of San Antonio that can be used to build out the infrastructure that's needed, and the school district can then provide the access and almost serve as the ISP supported by an AT&T and a Verizon, right? That's how we make sure we give that access. And then when it comes to major build projects, dig once. We know if we're doing a highway project or all this crap that's going on in 1604, we better be putting in high speed. We better be putting in high speed fiber optic cables, right? When we put up a new lamp downtown or a street light downtown, it better have a 5G antenna on it, right? And so this is where the infrastructure needs to come. And if we look at previous technological evolutions, the technology came, then the infrastructure. So we have to be thinking of the infrastructure. Why has everybody gotten so upset about all the damn scooters in downtown San Antonio, right? There was no infrastructure for these places where to put the scooters and where they're supposed to go, where you're supposed to sit them, right?
Sure.
So if we're going to have a comprehensive transportation package, you got to have it. And so that's where these conversations and where we should be thinking through this. And we also, and look, UTSA and what they're doing at the national, the NSSC, the National Security Collaboration, NSPC, National Security Collaboration Center, is pretty fantastic. What VIA is doing on some of the digital facing stuff. I can talk for the next 45 minutes on this, Richard. I'm starting to babble a little bit, but that's where we go on this.
Great. Well, I think it's a fantastic plan. And
as an aside, by the way, Rich, as an aside, you talk about what we're going to do next. One of the things I want to do is work with an illustrious university in San Antonio that may rhyme with Texas A&M, San Antonio, to develop an institute on technology and policy. And how do you take a political science major that gets a minor in data analytics, or a computer science major that has a minor in political science, give them an amazing internship one summer at the Department of Homeland Security, and then one amazing internship at Amazon AWS, and build that next person who's going to be driving policy because they understand technology. That's one of the areas that I look on staying involved once I'm out of Congress.
That's great. Well, that makes a ton of sense for us, so we're glad. So there's been a lot of dialogue. So before they passed the changes to the PPP, there was dialogue that I read a lot about, and maybe restructuring the whole PPP, and maybe providing dollars directly to a business that then they could flow through to employees. Is that gone, or is that still around?
Well, the initial concept of PPP is prevents people from going on unemployment. So businesses that were concerned about their being able to meet payroll, make sure that they were able to meet payroll. Now, the timing of this, even though it took from once this passed to money going out the door 8 days, and then another 8 days to get to put out $350 billion with a B, to do that in 16 days is pretty amazing. And look, some people got access to PPP that shouldn't have. And everybody owned it, and Mnuchin said, give it back or we're coming for you, right? And so we improved that, but the concept was this is what you're supposed to be doing to help in employers. Now, the debate about is there going to be another check that goes to an individual. The HEROES Act had, I think it was $2,000 for multiple months. The president has floated that he's open to the idea, but I'd be lying to you if I said that there was any concrete proposal right now that is really being discussed when it comes to that. And so I think what you're going to see is something similar to what we've already passed, that and to amplify what we've already done.
Fair enough. So let's just change it a little bit. So here's a question that came in. What do you think the Supreme Court might be doing on DACA come next week?
Look, I'll be honest. I'm worried about this decision and what the aftermath is. I know what the fix is, right? The fix is the USA Act. The House has already passed a version of the DREAM Act. It's not called the DREAM Act anymore.
Right.
I was supportive of that, but Pete Aguilar and I wrote the USA Act a couple of years ago.
I remember.
It came 4 votes shy of passing the Senate. This is when we still had Senator McCain with us, and I think the political environment has changed significantly. And I think the starting point is the USA Act. And to be frank, I'm restarting those conversations to see if we get ready if a something that goes ultimately against Dreamers happens next week. Look, the question is going to be, if the Supreme Court rules that the Obama era use of DACA was unconstitutional, what is the time frame that's there to address, to have a legislative fix to make sure these hundreds of thousands of young men and young women who have only known the United States of America as their home, who have already contributing to our society and our economy and our culture, they're already Americans. Let's finalize this. Oh, and then the number that are actually working in the health industry. And so you're going to take people that are working and already helping and being on the front lines of dealing with this global pandemic. It's crazy. And so I've learned in my time in Congress that Congress always works best when there's a deadline. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what ultimately is if worst case scenario, the Supreme Court is going to impose that deadline, which is going to crystallize Congress's focus. And again, it starts with, how do we get 60 votes in the Senate? Because the House has already passed some version. The DREAM Act will not pass in the Senate, and the USA Act, with some tweaks, we believe would absolutely pass the House and can get 60 votes in the Senate. And it's something that I think the president would sign into law.
Excellent. Well, and I think you're right. It's so interesting that if indeed the Supreme Court rules against DACA, that turns into a forcing mechanism. But sometimes that's what it takes, right? And so we'll take it, and hopefully we can get something done. As you know, the Chamber has been and continues to be a big supporter of talent in all forms. And DACA young men and women indeed are talent, and we want to keep them here. So thank you for championing that, Will. It's very, very important. So let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity, one of your focuses and one of your areas of expertise. What do you think is happening with cybersecurity?
We are losing, the U.S. is losing our competitive edge in this area. And we see that as more of our operations and activities go into the digital space, that increases our surface area of attack. And so there are some basic things. We need to have a national breach standard, meaning if information is stolen or exposed, there's some known ramifications. But that also means we need to have a privacy standard as well. Those are kind of like the first and second letters of the alphabet. And when we do that, we need to be making sure that we're upgrading our systems. Everybody needs to be having a cloud first plan in their infrastructure, regardless of what you're doing. And then we need to make sure that we have enough practitioners that understand how to defend our digital infrastructure. I've always said the future of cybersecurity is good artificial intelligence versus bad artificial intelligence. And so we have to be leaders in this area. But I think what this global pandemic has shown us, 6 months ago, nobody thought that the global economy would come to a standstill because of a virus. Just like nobody thought a fire sale was possible. A fire sale was popularized, I think it was Die Hard 4, where you had, your transportation systems, your financial services system, and utilities all collapse at the same time, and everybody in these industries say, oh, there's redundancy and there's resiliency, but we have to rethink those perspectives. We have to look, even in Texas, we all know we're on our own grid. There is a Chinese-owned wind farm that's providing energy onto the grid. I don't think the folks at ERCOT knew it was owned ultimately by the Chinese. There's another one that's trying to do that. What does that do for us? Foreign-owned power generation on our grid. And it's not just turning it off and not letting it happen. Can you overload the system? And how do we deal with the redundancy around that? So I would even say that's an even more basic issue of how our infrastructure is potentially being attacked by our adversaries. Oh, and by the way, we're seeing an increase from our adversaries doing this. We're seeing an increase in attacks by the Chinese around, even happening here in San Antonio, around the healthcare space. One, to try to understand how we're responding to COVID-19 because of the belief of who gets to a vaccine first has a significant first mover's advantage. And so being able to protect that intellectual property is important. And the way you do this is I've said this before, the former head of the NSA says, if the public sector thinks they can defend their infrastructure by themselves and the private sector can defend their infrastructure by themselves, it's the equivalent of the French believing the Maginot Line is going to protect them from the Germans, right? We have to be able to work together. That kind of information sharing is improving, but we need to move to operational collaboration. Do we all know what would happen in certain industries if there is a major attack and who's responsible for what? How do we improve the kinds of intelligence we're getting on these attacks? These are some of the questions that I've been working on and continue to work on.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your passion. It is clear, and so we look forward to you doing something in that next part of your life. So thank you. So let's change
that would be the second bucket, Richard, is staying involved in that interconnection of national security and technology.
For sure. So let's shift a little bit. So we've got a question here about the World Health Organization. What are you and your colleagues thinking about that in the U.S. House of Representatives?
Look, I think this administration's decision to try to pull out of the WHO is a bad decision. And one of the things, look, the WHO leadership has a lot of questions to answer. And what I did a couple of weeks ago was send a letter to every single foreign mission that has an embassy in Washington, D.C., asking them as member nations of WHO to ask WHO leadership some of the same questions. Questions like, why haven't WHO leadership pushed the Chinese for answering questions on why they're not participating in sharing samples? Even today, the Chinese are not sharing samples and research that every other country is doing. Why is that not happening? Two, where are some of the Chinese researchers and scientists that first let us know about this virus, and what are you doing with them, right? Basic question. Why have they gone through and discriminated against African nations in their response? Why did the WHO criticize the U.S. and Australia and the U.K. in some of our response to this when the Chinese were doing even more draconian answers? And here's what I found. I've gotten countries from every continent that has come back and said, we're with you, we agree with you, we're concerned with this. The WHO even, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, passed a resolution unanimously. The Chinese were forced to participate, saying we need to look into what has happened. So the way the WHO is important because it has helped us solve global health challenges. And the best way to make sure the WHO leadership provides the answers is to stay involved and fight and build coalitions in order to demand action by WHO leadership. So that's why I'm a firm believer we should be strengthening our alliances, not weakening them or getting rid of them. And this is what, and we're trying to figure out what does even pulling out of the WHO mean, because there are rules and regulations around this. But look, WHO leadership has some problems, right? And every country agrees with that. And the problems rhyme with the word China. And so we have to continue to put pressure on that. And we're not alone on this, but we should be showing global leadership and not disengaging.
Excellent. Very good. Great perspective. So going back to recovery, so one of the things that we have been pushing, as well as other not-for-profits that are 501c6s, so we're a little bit different than a C3, is being able to use PPP, which we don't right now. And there's a whole coalition that we've developed here in town, all over the country as well. What are the prospects of allowing 501c6s into the deal?
So Richard, that's a question you submitted yourself, didn't you?
Yes.
No, look. So there is. I think within the Texas delegation, there's uniform support to making this happen. And so the question is going to be, what are the folks on the other side of the aisle wanting in order to get something like this to happen, right? And also we're trying to explore whether that Treasury can change the rules. Without there being a legislation on this. So if Kevin McCarthy was Speaker, that would have been passed. But this is something, and the person that's really leading the charge on this in the entire country is Kevin Brady from Houston. Now, I think most people know Kevin.
Yep.
When y'all come up for essay to DC, Kevin always speaks to us, and he is the senior Republican on the House Ways and Means Committee. But this is it's hard for me to handicap whether this will get included, but this is definitely one of the things that we're trying.
Great. Well, thank you, Will. Thanks for that. We really appreciate it. And again, there are other groups in town, like Visit San Antonio, Manufacturers Association, et cetera. We're all in the same boat, and we sure could use a little help. So going back to cybersecurity, what are your thoughts on cybersecurity and the next election cycle?
So I would say I always have to remind folks that I was prior to the 2016 election, I was hooting and hollering and saying we should be kicking the Russians out of the country because they were trying to manipulate our elections, right? And that why we got to remind ourselves why were the Russians doing? The Russians were doing that to try to erode trust in all of our institutions. And at that point in the 2016 election, we had not seen any indication of our vote counting machines being tampered or the systems that aggregate this. And so even back in 2016, when Jay Johnson was head of Homeland Security, he made voting infrastructure critical infrastructure, which meant the Department of Homeland Security could use grants and help harden these kinds of systems. And so what you've seen over the entire country over the last 4 years is upgrading of machines, upgrading of processes. The secretaries of state who originally were against this move of making voting systems critical infrastructure because they thought that the federal government was going to take it over, which no one believed that was going to be the case, are glad that this has happened. And so you have a unprecedented level of focus on this across our states. Again, you have new machines, you have new tactics, techniques, and procedures in order to defend the actual the systems that are used in well over 10,000 election jurisdictions across the United States. But the issue of disinformation is still being addressed, right? And how do you address disinformation? It's not just the federal government's role. I think the federal government actually has a very small role because of our First Amendment rights on how you can address these kinds of things. And that's where civil society, media, social media companies, I don't think have done enough to figure out how you address actual weaponized disinformation to try to influence the campaigns.
Very good. So here's a little bit different question. This is regarding infrastructure. So the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure just unveiled a $494 billion Invest in America Act to address the country's most critical infrastructure needs. Can you give us some insight into that?
Into this specific bill, no, it was just reviewed. This is everybody has been saying since my 5.5 years in Congress, infrastructure is something Republicans and Democrats can agree on, right? And I think we can, but now it comes time to a bill, and because the FAST Act is, I think it needs to be renewed in a year. Again, that deadline is what's going to force conversations. Here's what I do know. Infrastructure is more than just about bridges, dams, roads, and systems. It also is. It's also digital infrastructure, as we talked about at the beginning of this conversation. And it also comes down to how is it going to be funded? All right. Austin has used all of its tricks and all the accounting tricks they can to maximize their piece of the Highway Trust Fund dollar. One thing every Texan, Republican and Democrats united in is that for every tax dollar we spend in Texas should come back to us.
Yes.
I believe we're the final donor state where the money that we collect from the highway, from the federal gas tax still goes and pays for other projects in other states based on this old school formula. Most Texans are like, look, let us just keep what we have. And so there hasn't been a solution on how, because I think everybody recognizes the need outweighs our ability to fund it, and what are the creative solutions to do that. And that's where I think most of the big debates are going to happen over the next few months.
Well, and of course, you are well aware that our beloved former Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison was a big champion on trying to get us out of this whole donor state thing, and she's been out of Congress or out of the Senate for a long time. So these are hard hills to climb and hard rocks to move. But I appreciate the fact that y'all are trying to do it, and hopefully we'll make some progress.
Yeah, and look, my buddy and someone that's important in all these conversations is Henry Cuellar.
Oh yeah.
Henry Cuellar has a very big bag of tricks. And so I've learned from him. Everybody considers him the congressman from Laredo, but he does so much from San Antonio.
He does.
He really has been a great partner and a great friend on all these initiatives.
Agreed 100%. And on that note, how about this? You and Congressman Cuellar recently sent a letter to Secretary Mike Pompeo and Mexico's Foreign Secretary Ebrard, calling for the coordinated definition of essential. Can you give us some insight on what that issue is and maybe what's going on in relation to U.S.-Mexico trade?
Sure. So what we had found is that President López Obrador in Mexico, what they had deemed essential was slightly different than our version of essential, and that was impacting our North American supply chains. And so we were seeing impact here because even though we believe this one piece in that infrastructure, in that supply chain was critical, the components that were being produced in Mexico was not being seen as critical. So it was impacting supply chains. So all the folks that were impacted, Henry and I said, okay, look, let us know, figure out, get us a chart, and we'll go to both foreign ministers and say this needs to be fixed. And so we've been in dialoguing with Ambassador Barcena, who is the Mexican ambassador to the U.S., who's fantastic to work with.
Great friend, great friend.
And absolutely, she is. And to try to get this. Now, this also is connected to an issue on cross-border flows that have been to essential movements up until the 22nd of this month. This is when it's going to be relooked. I think it's important that on both sides of our border that these communities are looking at, reopening and recovery and advancement in the same way. And this is something that I've been working with the mayors and the governors, and so has Congressman Cuellar, to make sure that there's reciprocity on both sides. This issue will probably won't get resolved until closer to the end of this month. But we all know that the U.S., Mexico, and Canada, we build things together. Oh, and by the way, we got to sort this out so we can figure out how to use North American supply chains in order to deal with the Chinese and bring some of those supply chains out of China back to places like Mexico, U.S., and Canada.
Amen. Amen, Will. Well, we're getting close to the time that you have to leave. I know that you have something else buttoned up here. But how about if you maybe spend a minute or two reflecting on your time in office? Tell us about a high point and maybe something that you could have maybe changed and weren't able to do.
Look, one of the things that I'll still be working on is this concept of a cyber national guard, and how do you create a group of cyber warriors that can be in the government, then go out in the private sector, but then be surged back into the federal government, not just in the military and NSA, but at Census Bureau and places like that. So that would be one of those things that's on my list that I don't know if I'm going to be able to check off in the next 6 months. But one of the things that I am going to, the part that I love about this job is fighting for people that need to be fought for, right? Like one of the earlier issues was, we had a woman call our office. I believe she was about 76 years old. Her husband had died a couple of years before, and he was a veteran, and she was supposed to be continuing to get his veterans benefits. A shocker, the VA screwed something up, and she wasn't getting that support, and she was about to get evicted from her house. Somebody suggested that she call my office. She called my office, and we put our heads together, and we were able to get sorted out, and we got all the back pay, and she was able to stay in her house. Right? There's example upon example like that. There's a young lady who has MS, and she needed there's 10 wheelchairs, right? Medicare reimburses 9 of those 10 wheelchairs. She needs the 10th, right? And it literally required congressional action to get it done. She advocated for people that were impacted like her. We were able to help out and get it done. And so those are the things that for me made me love this job and to keep doing it. So and then also DC to DQ. That was awesome, by the way. That was awesome. Yeah, I may still do that. May not have as many people show up when I do DC to DQ next time. But
hey, if you're giving away dilly bars, we're there.
We got to get them to sponsor one of these congressional, post-congressional activities.
You got it.
Yeah. So look, and I'm also good. Look, I'm not dying. We're gonna run through the tape. Part of this is I'm proud of what my team and I has been able to what I consider is the gold standard of constituent services and solving problems regardless of whether you vote in a Democratic primary, Republican primary, or you don't vote, right? Our job is to help everybody. And I think we did that, and we're going to continue to do that in these remaining 6 months.
Well, thank you so much. You have been a true champion, and I can't recall a single person that has been in office the short period of time that you have. In the scheme of things, seniority is what really makes things happen. And you don't really have a lot of seniority, but you sure have a lot of heft. And by that, I mean you haven't been there that long, right? But you have been able to do some things that are incredible.
In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, Richard. Now look, focus on real problems.
Yeah.
Focus. The only way we've ever gotten big things done in this country is together. And so let's focus on those. Oh, and guess what? This is what I've learned from representing 29 counties that and a 71% Latino district. Way more unites us than divides us as a country. And when you focus on those things, that's how you get big things done. And that's how I've been able to have, I think now it's 16 pieces of legislation signed into law in 5.5 years, which is more than what members of Congress that have been serving for decades have been able to do. So I'm proud of that legacy, and we got a couple more in the hopper that we're gonna be able to bring across the finish line, and then solving little problems like taking swastikas off of headstones in a VA cemetery. Guys, why is it taking 80 years to do that? This is a no-brainer. So anyways, be able to solve problems like that.
Well, thank you, Will. I know you need to go, so Thanks very much. We love you, and we know you're going to finish strong, as you've said. And so your service to this community, to this country, is laudable and is appreciated. We salute you. Thank you.
And if y'all aren't following me on social media, Hurd on the Hill. Talk to y'all soon.
You got it.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Will. We also thank everyone for tuning in today to join us, to listen to Will and all the great things that he's doing and the insight he's been able to provide us. I'd also, of course, like to again thank our sponsors, AT&T, Credit Human, Lockheed Martin, Port San Antonio, Southwest Airlines, Valero, and Walmart. These businesses lift this community up and certainly lift this chamber up, and we appreciate it. As a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, this webinar was recorded, and so we generally have it on our website maybe 24 to 48 hours after, because it takes time to download and all that sort of thing. And it's going to be on our SA Chamber rapidresponse.org website that we created for all the stuff surrounding the pandemic. The questions that we weren't able to get answered, Will is committed to answering them, so we're sending them to his staff, and we'll get them answered up. And I want to highlight just another couple things that we have. This is a new thing that we just added to our Congressional Series. U.S. Congressman Dan Crenshaw, who of course is a star in his own right, has agreed to join us for a webinar on July 8th at noon. And so more to come on that. He just put out a book that's extremely important and entertaining and content-laden. So he'll talk to us a little bit about that. And of course, he's on the House Committee on Budget and Homeland Security. And of course, as Military City USA, his insight is going to be very, very important. And then also we're hosting our United State of the City address. Our mayor is going to join us a week from today, Friday at noon, to tell us about what's going on. He gave a primetime address earlier this week, and he's committed to providing us a short intro, but really opening up, just like Will did, to questions. So he wants to hear from us as a business community about what's on our mind, and he's committed to answering as many questions as he can. So that'll be next Friday. And then I'd like to close by just reminding everybody that we're in the midst of census time. Filling out that 2020 census is oh so important so that we can reap the benefits of the number of people that live in this community and the needs that we have in this community and the successes that we've been able to do. But we need that help from the federal government, and it's all about getting an accurate count. So I'd encourage you all as business leaders to talk to your employees, talk to your family, yourself, fill it out, and we can get our fair share. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we say thank you, and we are adjourned.